Picture this. You land in a country where the economy hasn't just collapsed, it evaporated. Where 70% of the population is skipping meals. Where doctors are driving taxis because taxi drivers make more money. Where people are burning furniture to cook food. And yet, one city is still standing, still moving, still trading. How? That question is going to completely change the way you think about economic collapse. Because what's happening in Cuba right now isn't just a humanitarian crisis. It's a live experiment in what happens when a modern society runs completely out of road. And the answers coming out of that one city, they're equal parts terrifying and fascinating. My name is Host, and today we're going inside the last functioning city in Cuba, what it looks like, who's surviving, and more importantly, why, while the rest of the island falls into a darkness most of us can't even imagine. But first, let me give you the number that should stop you cold. Cuba's economy shrank by over 11% in a single year. To put that in context, America's Great Depression, the worst economic collapse in modern Western history, peaked at a 13% contraction over 4 years. Cuba did nearly that in 12 months. The electricity grid is failing so badly that some provinces are going dark for 20 hours a day. Not 20 minutes, 20 hours. Food imports have collapsed, medicine has vanished. Over 500,000 people fled the island in a single year, the largest migration wave Cuba has seen since the revolution itself. So when I tell you one city is still functioning, you need to understand what that actually means in this context. It doesn't mean thriving, it doesn't mean comfortable. It means people are eating, people are moving, commerce is happening, the lights are on, at least some of them. That city is Havana. But here's what nobody's telling you about Havana right now. The Havana that exists today is nothing like the Havana the Cuban government wants you to see. Beneath the vintage cars and the colonial architecture, beneath the surface that still gets photographed for travel blogs, there is a shadow economy, a survival network, and a set of financial mechanisms operating completely outside any system you'd recognize. And those mechanisms, they're the only reason the city hasn't gone dark. Here's the part that gets truly strange. The tool keeping Havana alive was invented by its own people out of desperation. And it works in a way that mainstream economists would call impossible. Economists have a term for what happens when a formal economy collapses. They call it informalization. But that word is too clean, too academic. It doesn't capture what's actually happening on the streets of Havana right now. Because what the Cuban people have built, out of nothing, out of pure survival instinct, isn't just a black market. It's a parallel civilization. Let's break down exactly how it works, because this is where it gets genuinely jaw-dropping. When the Cuban peso became essentially worthless, and we're talking about a currency that lost over 90% of its purchasing power in just a few years, people stopped using it for anything serious. But they couldn't just switch to dollars either. The government criminalized dollar cash transactions. So what did they do? They built a system called the informal exchange network. Cubans call it el mercado informal, and it runs on a currency the government can't touch, can't print, and can't devalue. Remittances. Money sent from family members who fled to Miami, Madrid, and Mexico City. Transferred digitally, converted through back-channel brokers at rates 3 to 4 times the official government rate, then moved through WhatsApp groups, neighborhood networks, and trusted middlemen who operate completely in the open, because at this point, everyone is doing it, including the people who are supposed to stop it. Here's the number that should make your jaw drop. Remittances to Cuba are estimated at $3 to $4 billion per year in a country whose entire GDP has been collapsing. That flow of outside money isn't supplementing Havana's economy. It is the economy. But now here's the tension inside that system, the crack that makes everything unstable. That money doesn't reach everyone equally. It flows to the people with family abroad, which means Havana has quietly split into 2 populations living in the same streets, the same neighborhoods, sometimes the same buildings. One group has access to hard currency. They can buy food at the private markets, the paladares, the street vendors. the informal tiendas that have quietly replaced the state stores. The other group has nothing but pesos, and pesos buy almost nothing. This economic fracture, this invisible wall running through the city, is creating something deeply dangerous. Because when you have two economies in one city, and one of them is visibly surviving while the other is starving, social pressure builds. And in Cuba, social pressure has historically only had one outlet. There's a street in Havana called Obispo. Tourists love it. Colorful buildings, street musicians, the smell of coffee drifting out of doorways. On the surface, it looks like a city that's struggling but surviving. People are moving, vendors are selling, there's life here. Walk 2 blocks off that street, and you enter a completely different reality. Crumbling buildings with families of 6 living in 2 rooms, lines of people waiting hours for a bread ration that may or may not arrive. Elderly people sitting in the dark, not because the power is out in that moment, but because they've stopped expecting it to come back. Children who haven't been in school consistently in over 2 years because schools keep shutting down from lack of resources. Same city, same government, same revolution that promised everyone equal outcomes. 2 completely different worlds, separated by about 200 meters. And this is where the economics become impossible to ignore, because what's happening in Havana isn't random, it's structural. The fracture line tracks almost perfectly along one variable: access to foreign currency. The people surviving, even modestly thriving in Havana today, almost universally have one thing in common. Someone in their family left, a cousin in Tampa, a brother in Madrid, a daughter who made it to Chile. That connection to the outside world is now worth more than any job, any education, any government benefit the Cuban state can offer. Think about what that does to a society's psychology. The message it sends, loudly, undeniably, is that the only path to survival is escape, not reform, not work, not loyalty to the system, escape. And if you can't escape yourself, your only hope is that someone you love already did. This is why the migration numbers are so staggering. Cuba lost approximately 1 in 10 of its entire population in just 2 years. Doctors, engineers, teachers, construction workers, the exact people a country needs to rebuild are the ones leaving fastest because they're the ones with the skills to get visas, to get jobs abroad, to send money back, which creates a feedback loop that economists call a brain drain spiral. The more skilled people leave, the worse conditions get. The worse conditions get, the more skilled people leave. Havana is currently caught in that spiral. But here's what makes this story more complex than just a collapse narrative. Some people in Havana are making more money than they've ever made in their lives. And the system they're using to do it? It's something no government economist predicted. No Western financial model accounted for it. And it's hiding in plain sight. In the middle of an economic collapse, someone is always making money. That's not cynicism, that's economic law. And in Havana right now, a specific class of people has emerged, quietly, quickly, and with a level of wealth that would have been unimaginable in Cuba just 5 years ago. Locals have a word for them: los nuevos ricos, the new rich. And the way they built their wealth is a masterclass in crisis economics. It started with the private property reform of 2021. For the first time in 6 decades, the Cuban government, desperate for any economic activity that could generate revenue, quietly allowed private businesses to legally operate at scale. Small restaurants, repair shops, rental properties. On paper, it was a minor policy tweak. In practice, it cracked open a door that had been sealed since 1959. The people who moved first through that door are now operating some of the only functioning commerce in the city. Here's how the math works, and pay close attention because this is where it gets genuinely remarkable. A private restaurant owner in Havana, a paladar, prices their menu in MLC. That's Cuba's magnetic currency, a quasi-dollar instrument tied to foreign currency deposits. Customers pay in remittance-backed funds. The owner collects hard currency equivalent. They use that hard currency to source ingredients through informal supply chains, bypassing the collapsed state distribution system entirely. They pay staff in pesos, plus informal hard currency bonuses. The result? In a country where the average state salary is equivalent to roughly 15 to 20 US dollars per month, a successful private business owner in Havana can generate 2,000, 3,000, sometimes more in a single month. That's not a typo. That gap between $15 and $3,000 inside the same city, under the same government, in the same collapsing economy, is one of the most extreme wealth divergences produced by any economic crisis in modern Latin American history. But here's what the new rich understand that everyone else doesn't. Their wealth is fragile, built on a foundation that could shift overnight. Because everything they've built depends on two things remaining stable: remittance flows from abroad and the government's continued tolerance of private enterprise. And right now, both of those things are showing cracks. The Cuban government has a long documented history of allowing private enterprise just long enough to stabilize a crisis, then nationalizing it, confiscating it, reversing course the moment the pressure eases. It happened in the 1990s after the Soviet collapse. The government opened up, things stabilized, then they tightened again. Is it happening again right now? The signs are already there. And if it does, the last functioning city in Cuba won't be functioning much longer. Here's the twist nobody saw coming. Havana isn't just a story about Cuba. It's a warning, a preview, a live case study in what happens at the terminal stage of a system that refused to adapt until adaptation became survival. And the reason you should care, even if you've never thought about Cuba once in your life, is because the mechanisms destroying Havana aren't unique to socialism or Caribbean island economies or Cold War political failures. They're universal. Currency debasement, institutional collapse, brain drain spirals, wealth fracturing along access lines, a government simultaneously desperate enough to liberalize and ideologically unable to commit to it. These aren't Cuban problems. These are late-stage economic failure problems, and they're appearing in early, softer forms in economies around the world right now. But let's finish Havana's story first, because the ending, or what looks like the ending, is not what you'd expect. Here's what's actually happening on the ground in early 2025. The blackouts have gotten worse. Even in Havana, the city the government prioritizes above everywhere else, rolling blackouts are now hitting 12 to 16 hours daily in some neighborhoods. The informal economy is still moving, but it's moving slower. Remittance flows are being squeezed by tightening U.S. sanctions on transfer channels. The new private businesses that emerged after 2021 are facing increasing regulatory pressure, surprise inspections, and what multiple Cuban economists describe as a deliberate campaign to limit their growth before they become politically threatening. The government is doing exactly what it did in the 1990s, allowing just enough freedom to prevent total collapse, then pulling back the moment survival is no longer the immediate crisis. And the people of Havana, the ones who built the shadow economy, who created the remittance networks, who opened the paladeras and the repair shops and the informal markets, they know it. They've seen this before. Their parents lived through the last version of this cycle, which is why the migration numbers aren't slowing down. They're accelerating, because the people with the clearest view of what's coming, the entrepreneurs, the networkers, the ones who understand the system well enough to work around it, are the ones leaving fastest, taking their capital, taking their skills, taking their children. And here's the final thought that should stay with you long after this video ends. Every economic system, everyone, carries within it the seeds of its own failure condition. The question is never if those seeds activate. The question is what the people inside that system do when they feel the ground starting to shift. Some wait for the government to fix it. Some build parallel systems in the shadows. Some leave. And some, the rarest ones, stay and build something new inside the ruins, knowing the risks, accepting the fragility, betting on human adaptability over institutional stability. Those people are still in Havana right now, running businesses that shouldn't exist, trading currencies that aren't supposed to circulate, feeding neighborhoods that the state has quietly abandoned. They are, in the most literal sense possible, the last functioning economy in Cuba. And whether they survive the next cycle of government tightening, whether Havana remains the last city standing or becomes just another data point in the collapse, will tell us something profound. Not just about Cuba, about what money, power, and human survival actually look like when every safety net is gone. Watch this space, because whatever happens next in Havana, it's coming to an economy near you sooner than you think. If this video made you think differently about economic collapse, share it with one person who needs to see it. And if you want to go deeper on how citizens survive when currencies fail, the next video is already waiting for you.